Well, hello and welcome to our first series, our first interview of our feature interviews, a series of which are on the new site. Hopefully you enjoy it because we're doing this before that and don't know what it looks like. So we thought one of the good things to do would be to do the team, and amongst other things, as you'll see up there at the moment, Matt Taylor is here with me, and obviously an integral person of the Punter Show is Marc Lambourne, because the Punter Show has been about us. So Marc, welcome to our feature interview. You always welcome our feature guests. Hello. This is a bit weird.
Studio 2.
Studio 2.
Incestuous.
Yeah, it is. But I suppose, the easiest way to start it is get back to right to the beginning. You're now, what, 30 years into a career in racing? Where did it all start?
Started when I was 10 years old, Dal. End of year 5, or 5th class I was then at school, and some of the neighbours' kids were pretty keen to tell the world how clever they were at bowling up at the local tab with their parents on Saturdays and backing a fistful of winners. And I had always been fairly competitive with these guys, played cricket with them particularly, and I thought, well, I better have a look at this because I reckon I could do better than you. So I remember it was just after Think Big had won his second Melbourne Cup, and I started checking out the Saturday morning form guide. I remember it was like January the 10th, 1976. I sat down and I went, right, I'm just going to follow this all afternoon, you know. Training next to me, what you called the form guide back then, and I picked out a jockey to follow, Jay Duggan. I picked out a trainer to follow, Bart Cummings, and I was hooked. I was freaking hooked. I just, suddenly then, my life became all about following the races on Saturdays, accumulating the form guides, so I'd keep them in a sheaf, sort of, well, they weren't bound, but because they were lift outs at the time, out of the Australian, I could sort of keep a year's worth in one sheaf of newspapers, and I would comb them. I'd comb the back issues, try and look for patterns, either in the legends or the riders or the types of races. I was predominantly interested in Melbourne for some reason, because Melbourne seemed to throw up rougher winners than Sydney.
We had a mate who realised that once.
and also they seem to have wetter tracks, even though that's perhaps not anymore.
Yeah.
Something's happened to the climate.
Not really.
But yeah, they used to throw up tons of long-priced winners from what I can remember. And so I would go over these back results and I'd backfit all these systems. I'd have a pile of systems relating to 3-year-old fillies over a mile, or just various distances, various sexes, various types of races. And I managed to get hold of the Maximum books that came out of the Turf Monthly at the time. So Turf Monthly were flogging these systems called Maximum, and they were books of systems, or booklets, sort of pamphlets. And I wrote away for them, and they'd arrive, and I'd go through those systems, and I'd sort of pick out bits that I liked, and I'd try them. And I was hooked, Al. I just couldn't wait for Saturday to try out the 6 or 7 systems that I'd developed, and invariably they were very, very. It was a fairly depressing feature of.
Well, it only set you up for the next 30 years, really, didn't it?
You know, because you'd backfit these systems so beautifully, and I couldn't understand why they just weren't predicting a pile of winners. But anyway, it kept my interest, and that's pretty much how I began all the way through high school.
So that's just growing and growing from that. When you said from that 10, when you were 10, that's just building and building it week in, week out, year after year.
Yeah, I was still doing the things I'd normally done on Saturday, usually Saturday morning. So there was plenty of time Saturday afternoon. I remember taking my sister to her netball and listening to Vivace win the Golden Slipper on the to sort of hear someone had a radio. So I was sort of in and out, but through high school, I continued to sort of look for patterns in horse racing. That was what intrigued me about horse racing. The fact that there were these things that seemed to, at least with hindsight, they seemed to fit a pattern or a variety of patterns. There was an element of predictability about it.
That's a very, very mature way to go about things as a youngster.
Yeah, well, in terms of my first year looking at the races, I remember I persuaded my dad to go into the tab, and he thought that was a very wicked, evil place, to have a 25-cent, because that was the unit then, feature double on the Doncaster Sydney Cup, and I seem to remember having a dream about this particular feature double. where I dreamt that Like a Lover had won, and of course Like a Lover was John Duggan. Like a Lover in the Doncaster into Upik in the Sydney Cup, who was this like New Zealander. I don't know how I even knew about Upik.
Probably read about it in the Turf Monthly.
Well, yeah, perhaps not. I didn't necessarily get those magazines on the button. You know,
Yeah.
I might have been looking for someone to hand me a past edition, because back then you sort of didn't get what you wanted, like you do now.
No. Yeah, a $5 Turf Monthly, or probably wasn't $5 then, a $5 Turf Monthly would have been the greatest gift of all, as opposed to a $5,000 iPod or something like that now.
So, as it turned out, the feature double Like a Lover went down in a close finish to Authentic Air, written by Kevin Moses, trained by the arch nemesis TJ Smith. That was when I realised that TJ Smith was to be hated.
Yeah, it was quite funny, wasn't it? You were either Cummings or TJ Smith, weren't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, all our sports tended to be like that, didn't they?
Yeah,
you know, there were the
McEnroe, not McEnroe.
Yeah. You picked a team.
Yep.
And someone else represented the antithesis of that team.
Yeah.
And so your team was your chosen one, plus whoever was playing the arch enemy.
Yeah.
So there was the result was I went close, but I didn't score. Later that year, my next door neighbour, who was a bookie, took me to the casino races on a Saturday, and it was Derby Day in Sydney. It was back when the Derby was running in the spring. Larnage won the Epsom and Great Lover won the Derby, and I couldn't believe it. I got to casino, I'm so excited. I'm thinking these bookies, they're going to put up their own prices about, well, Sydney or Melbourne or whatever. No, then this bloody loudspeaker, this disembodied voice through the loudspeaker just gave them the call, told them what to put up, and I'm thinking, well, I thought bookies actually set their own boards, but they were actually getting a teleprinter call. Yeah. Which I'd never realised happened. So that was my first experience of the races. I didn't get back to the races for another 6 or 7 years.
You said, I don't even know the answer to this question. You said casino, where did you grow up?
In Kyogle, which is a place 20 miles up the road, which didn't have its own race course.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's on the northern rivers of New South Wales. It's sort of, it's 3/4 of an hour inland from Byron Bay. And it's very good country, but the dairy industry was on its knees at that time, and people were sort of switching to either beef, or there were farms being subdivided and hobby farms were springing up with macadamia nuts at the time. So it was a terrific place to grow up, but not much really happening in terms of racing. I got the way through my high school, and at the end of high school, my next door neighbour said, right, come and work for me over the school holidays before you go to uni. So off I trotted, and I learnt penciling principally at Ballina races, but I went to Casino, Lismore and Ballina, wherever they were racing that Saturday. And every Saturday they had a race.
Well, it was the country circuit, wasn't it? And it had life to it.
And it was fucking thrilling.
Yeah.
It was like your busy day now. Every Saturday was like that up there.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, and I was struggling to get them down, and it was a great day out. And obviously I'd sort of have a bit of a look at the races before then, but I don't know what was happening at the time. But I was getting to follow the horses that I was picking out, but no betting involved really. Get down to Sydney at uni, and right, I'm going to the track. I'm going to the track every Saturday. I'm going to ask bookies for a job. I was only 17 and a half, so theoretically I couldn't get a licence, even though lots of people have found their way around that one.
Yes.
So that was the autumn of '83. It was a very wet autumn. Strawberry Road won the Derby. It was when I think they postponed the races at Randwick because they couldn't race.
It might have been. Was it the year of the picture of the? No, they raced that day. Wasn't it the picture of the rowboat at the top of Randwick?
Well, that was actually the following year. That was November the following year, and the Anzac Parade was a river. Yeah. And yet they raced the river on Thursday, and they raced on Saturday.
Wouldn't be happening these days.
Unthinkable now.
Lovely. So you came down to uni. You started a law degree, didn't you?
Yeah. Commerce law. I was first year. First year uni is just first year uni. It's basically do what you want. You know, a little bit of effort goes a long way in first year uni. But by mid '83, I'd started working for my first bookie here. All races were at Warwick Farm because Randwick was out of play.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. It was closed. Closed for renovations. You know, how often has it been closed for renovation? Many times. Yeah. So all the feature races were at Warwick Farm. So I started August 1, new season. My bookie had got a gig in the interstate. So he'd switched from the locals to the interstate. He needed someone. He said, have you ever done the bag before? I said, sure.
And how did you go on the bag the first go?
Oh, well, it was a struggle, but you know what you like when you're 18? You're just bulletproof.
Yeah.
You know, nothing really phases you. So that was the start of my clerking at the races, but all the while I was writing. I'd bought Don Scott's books by this stage. I started with Winning, and then I went to the Winning Way, and I was keeping my own ratings, and I was trying to get hold of anyone else's ratings. Bob Charlie was selling ratings from a newsstand in Martin Place at that time, little ratings cards, and it was fascinating, the world of weight ratings, because here were numbers you could just like grab hold of and make them your own and manipulate them and try and use them to forecast the results of horse races.
And is that where it sort of really grabbed hold? Was it when that was becoming that challenge? I think one of the great things that I've heard you say about racing and what you do, it's the greatest intellectual challenge you can take yourself on. And as that's developing and these numbers are coming through, that's where you're seeing and that's where you're really getting grabbed hold of?
Yeah, see the fundamental of weight ratings are actually class ratings. So you've got to work out which races are stronger and which races are weaker. And at the time, I didn't really have too many clues about. I was sort of persuaded by the mainstream thinking, which was, you know, this welter is better than this maiden. When in fact, as we know, the answer's a pineapple.
Yeah.
In many cases, it's just not as cut and dried as that. But Don Scott had presented these class figures, and I was looking to try and work out which races were stronger than average and weaker than average based on those class figures. I was putting together my own ratings. I was betting of a fashion on those ratings, and then I got the job, and that sort of stuff took a little bit of a backseat, but I was still keenly following the racing. You've got to remember I was stuck in the interstate, so Sydney was, you know, I could sort of only keep an ear out for what was happening in Sydney. But through the first 5 years of me being a bookies clerk, I worked for a variety of bookies. I finally got into the Sydney ring. I worked for Rails Bookies, Jack Muir. I was poached to work for Tom Moore, who was a great sort of mentoring type of people such as me through the mid-80s. And then finally I was approached by Peter Todd. And this is the beginning of 1988. And he was looking for someone to give him a market. Now obviously people were selling markets around the time. The most famous one at the time was Jack Freeman out of Newcastle. But I don't know, Peter's always been a sort of like a mentoring type, and he must have been looking for someone to work with, and he picked me. And that is a seminal point.
That is, yeah. I was going to say that there was a critical point in it. Before we go on about that, describe the ring for those who don't know it, and for Matt at the time. What the ring at that time we're talking, was it 88 you said? About,
So
describe it what it looks like, because that's what it feels like yesterday, doesn't it? But
so we were on this bank at Randwick, and obviously the bookies were around the fig trees, or in the middle in between the fig trees, and the asphalt sort of rose to a point, and in the outer were 20 or so bookies.
In the outer. There's 20 or so bookies.
Yes, so there's 20 odd bookies on the rails. There's 20 bookies in the outer. There's a tea house ring, which has got the interstate books. There's another 20 bookies in there. There's a silver ring over near where the race stalls were, where they've since been moved. But there was a silver ring there, and there were other bits and pieces of betting rings around the place. And it was frenetic. So because Peter Todd was putting up the markets first,
and Peter Todd, that was the first time you'd get a bookmaker's market.
Okay.
Would be when Peter Todd put it up, and he was always the first to go up straight after the previous race. Up until that point, you hadn't seen a bookmaker's market.
No, you sort
Exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and people will be out there and they'd be going, "This was 6-1 in the paper. Where's the 6-1?" And of course it's 2-1, and no one had a concept of what had gone on to create these prices. So
actually, just on that, the paper prices that everyone was referring to, they were about as probably well put together as the tips in the paper for Lismore or something like that. It's just somebody doing their best, putting a number next to it. Really, isn't it? There was no real rhyme, reason or logic or no huge science to those prices that were in the paper.
Yeah, which is quite surprising given the interest that was clearly in those.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, before we had bookies markets to look at for the men's day, I mean, they were your only guide, and they just went through the motions. You
Yeah.
didn't, like, so much of life, full stop, is going through the motions. You see it everywhere. But for something that you're passionate about, and most people that are into the races are quite passionate, it's surprising that there was so little regard given to the fact that they didn't bear much of a resemblance to what went on.
No, you just knew you just took no relevance of it. It was a very flippant market. Anyway.
But yet there were so many systems based on such and such being a pre-post favourite.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So early unders and back against it.
So many of the systems used the tipster's pole and the pre-post market.
the tipster's pole.
Was that one of your systems you?
Of course, you just used what you had.
Yeah.
You didn't have much. You had very little information. You were a slave to the newspaper.
And I think you got your information from the newspaper, as we mentioned, those Racetrack Magazine or Perth Monthly, and that was
when you discovered you could get a race book the day before.
Oh my God!
Right, so there was two things. You could get a Sportsman on Thursday afternoon by lining up outside their News Limited office, or there was a little hole in the wall where you got the Sportsman, and there'd be 6 or 7 or maybe a dozen diehards out there. Frank Smith was one of them. Terry Anson was another, I remember. That we'd all gather together there to wait for the Sportsman to come out, and we'd wait and we'd wait and we'd wait, and it'd be like 2:30 and down the bundle had come. And then you worked out that you could get the Ross Print race book, which was delivered to the race club, be it STC or AJC, and you'd camp in the STC or the AJC the afternoon before. That's great. To wait for your race book, because
there was no race net.
You wanted to put stuff in your race book for the next day. It was so handy to have a race book before the race meeting. So that was where we were at in the late 80s. It was like everyone was keen, and the betting ring was vibrant, and it was vibrant because there was 2 people going up first. Arthur Singh in the outer was putting up prices that were of some interest, but Peter was putting up 110%.
Aggressive start.
Wow, they were just 10 deep, waiting for him to go up, and he was going up pretty much straight after they'd gone past the post of the previous race. So it was like there was no stopping, there was no downtime. So he put them up, and it'll be on for young and old, because Ross Evans would have a pretty sophisticated market of his own, and he was operating out of what we would call the high value room, and he had his guys out there betting with Peter from the word go, because I don't know what sort of information he had other than the stuff that he was producing himself, but clearly there were guys there that knew what was going to happen in the market, or what there was going to be money for, and Peter didn't. Peter was just put it
up and say, here we go.
He was putting up all sorts of wild stuff, which had the advantage of absolutely testing the market from the word go. You're always talking about Bet365 prices. That's what they were like. But they were to lose 3,000. Whoever got it, and sometimes he'd let 3 or 4 people on to lose 3,000.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of like there's a couple of punters now that the corporate bookies want, who are the first in on Wednesdays, and you can use those to your advantage, even though you have to sort of cop it at a time. So was that part of his philosophy, or he was just getting it completely wrong? Look,
the idea is that if your limit is to lose 3,000, but you're making $50,000 books, right? You're getting an insight into the market straight away. And obviously they're going to be a small fraction of your total business on that race.
The key to it is the liquidity that was available then.
And volume. Liquidity and volume. So these bookies were holding up to $500,000 on a race meeting easily. And the big bookies were holding much more than that. But I mean, your sort of Common Garden Rails bookie, and I'm talking maybe about a dozen of those guys, and Mo Conlon was one of them. He's still there. And Robbie was just before he left, obviously, but got invited to leave. It was thrilling. It was thrilling, and you thought it was thrilling at the time, even though
it was. You knew it was.
Even though there are lots of things that you look back on and you go, "Oh wow, wasn't that amazing?" This was actually, it was seat of your pants stuff. It was, things were just going on, and so horses would go off, and there'd be 5 people deep, like thrusting their money at the bookie, and you never ever heard of a queue other than a payout queue,
Yep, exactly.
right?
It was a,
You
it
know,
was a bunch.
I don't think like the casual race goers, they didn't think to queue, or they didn't try and queue
No.
like they do now.
No. That was just all in. It's all in. Writing tickets,
You know, you just have to try
There
and
it is.
get the bagman to take your money first.
Yeah.
Because if the price went off, that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
gone.
exactly right. Yeah, and especially with Mo, I remember like Mo, if you missed out, he just abused the shit out of you if you asked for or something.
Really?
No, go away. Yeah, no, it was
Yeah,
great.
it was do your best.
Yeah.
It was absolutely it was on.
Do you remember one of your sort of better achievements early by assessing a horse, whether it was, you know, marking it much longer than what the market expected? Like, what was your first sort of
I
big
just
one?
remember the big mistakes. I think there was a Galaxy in 1989 that I'd marked. I can't even remember who won the race, but I didn't find it at all. I was
So you remember the mistakes, not the good things?
yeah, because they were the ones you got hammered with. You know,
Yeah.
it was like you got to the end of a race meeting where you'd done a market on each race,
But just to bring that back, like Copper, he's talking about the Galaxy, which is a Group 1.
Yeah.
And the first market is when Peter Todd's gone up 5 minutes after what the previous race, which would have been, that would have been on the Monday, could have been the Oaks the previous race, or whatever it was, being on the public holiday Monday.
It was a big day.
Is that right? I've got the wrong time, whatever it was, it was the public holiday Monday where people actually went to race on the public holiday Monday.
No futures.
No. The only futures you had were the doubles, the feature doubles.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, feature doubles.
So there was always a Waterhouse running a feature double. Usually it was Jack and
Bill Hurley.
Bill Hurley. Later Jeff Landry. The feature doubles were, but they were just sort of like a sideshow. The feature doubles, they were all sitting there. Someone was, there were guys into doubles because they were into the big prices, and Glenn would have been one of those guys, except that he wouldn't have liked having his money tied up for that long.
You had to go to cards night or something.
But the mid '80s are my first memory of Glenn, because I was a clerk. I was 18 years old. Glenn would have been 20 years old, and he was a clerk. But he was this young lair, complete lair. And I thought, who is this joker who thinks that he is just the bee's knees? He's yelling and screaming out. He's either writing tickets or he's scrounging around on the ground. And then I noticed he started,
What's changed?
and then I noticed him start to bet, and we sort of developed a bit of a relationship then, because obviously when people start betting, they want to talk about what's going on. At the same time, there was Steve Colagiuri and Dr. Nick, who are very visible presences in the ring, and they were with Nick's brother Andrew, who's now the face of Insiders polling.
On the SBS, yes.
The poll of the polls or whatever. They were very, very vocal in the middle of the ring, analysing and dissecting after every race. Steve particularly, because he would tell you how he knew that this was going to happen because of this and that. So they were very fertile days. Fertile for what was going to happen, particularly in the 90s and the early 40s.
How much of an impact were replays having at that time? Had they come into vogue then, or?
I remember staying back after the races for about an hour, just watching the replays.
Watching them over again, yeah, exactly right. And the Des Hoisted interviews. With the little quirky thing at the end. That was, don't worry.
Yeah. So we were sort of starting to buy video cassettes of the races and stuff like that to watch. Me being more about numbers rather than visuals. I was watching, but I wasn't necessarily incorporating what I was watching. I was probably just taking them on board, but it was only much later when I started to read some of the American handicapping books that I suddenly went, hang on, I can do something with this video watching that I couldn't do before. That came into play much, much later. That was the early 2000s.
So you've gone from the 80s, you're building up with Peter Todd.
And Peter had a network of bookies, country bookmakers, and David Baxter was one of the first one of those. Who David Baxter or Hillary
Hillary Cohen?
Hillary Cohen would ring me on a Saturday morning to get what I was producing for Peter,
To the
what I was
ton.
giving to Peter.
Yeah, and that's probably the birth of what we've seen today, which we're very seriously part of, is the sale of information.
Yeah, so that's how it began. I had a network of bookies. I had a small ad in the Sportsman where I was advertising those markets. It would have been close to the Royal Routine system, but Matt's just looking like, what the fuck is this?
Just a
The
walk,
Royal
yeah.
Routine.
And
The
some
Royal
audience will
Routine
be.
Yeah.
was this half-page ad on the Sportsman.
Okay.
It was always on page 5. So it was like the first major ad that you came to. And they would list their 4 winners that they tipped in Sydney and Melbourne every Saturday, so for a month before. They tipped 4 winners in Melbourne and Sydney every Saturday. And I'd go, wow, you know, like it didn't matter what prices they were, they always tipped 4 winners. And this was just a recurring theme in the Sportsman. I reckon it must have been in the Sportsman for 30 years.
Probably was, yeah.
Yeah, it was this famous system, but I never had the, well, I'm going to say balls to buy it, but I mean, it was just like, you just knew it was too good to be true, so you just resisted buying it. But I think someone did go shares in buying it or something, and it turned out it was one of those systems where you were given, everyone's sort of given a different horse.
Yeah, there was a few of those. If
JJ Williams.
Yeah, you'd get, you might be client A and you get 1 from 2 and 3, and client B gets 3 from 2 and 1.
Right.
So you've tipped every horse in the race. It's very easy to have tipped.
Anyway, so I was advertising in a very, very small way because it was cost a lot to
Oh, it was some circulation at the time. Would have been quite huge.
it was decent. It was up against the Sporting Globe at the time. But,
Of course, the Globe too. Yeah.
and predominantly I got bookies. Bookies
Yep.
that would ring me. They'd ring me on a Saturday morning and I'd have to give them the numbers manually. I'd have to give them the price. I'd go through the prices, I'd have to write them down. Then we discovered fax machines.
I remember those.
So suddenly I could fax people information. I got myself a dot matrix printer and I developed my own program using MS-DOS and GW Basic. And so I wrote a program where I could put numbers in and then print out, and I'd type the horse's name in and I could manipulate the odds.
Yep.
So I could get a printout of that, and I was shooting them off to bookies. I'd be working at Kembla on a Tuesday and I'd take 10 or 12 copies of it down there and I'd hand them out to bookies that were getting them. At Kembla on a Tuesday in 1990 there would have been 20 bookies.
Yeah.
Wow.
And all holding probably more than the collective ring holds now individually.
Yeah. It was, it's all pre cyberspace. And obviously the game was gone even before cyberspace took over. But it was, everyone would walk around saying, "Oh, this is hopeless," but hopeless was fantastic.
Yeah, hopeless was fantastic, wasn't it? When you look back at it, because it's just got this.
But I mean, a key development after that, Dallas, was so obviously I'm selling them lots of bookies. But Peter says, "Why don't we start betting off these markets? We're obviously using them to price. Why don't we go 50% in?" And I'd just taken out a bookies license, so he was working for me. He and his staff were working for me on the Thursday at Gosford Wyong and Hawkesbury. Well, later Hawkesbury. It was initially just Gosford Wyong, and we started betting off the prices. And we was like 50% in the punting.
Yep.
Both of our bookmaking businesses were independent.
Were many bookmakers punting at the time, or?
Oh well, obviously there'd always been punting bookmakers. And
Yeah.
Dominic Byrne was the most famous punting bookmaker,
Of course.
because Dominic was the leader of the ring. So whilst Peter would go up first, when Dominic came to put up his prices, everyone was like, right, like all eyes on Dominic. What's he putting up?
Okay.
And he was the one that was putting up dodgy prices. So because he had so much sway in the ring, he could get people to copy his prices.
Okay.
And then the men would start at each end of the rails, and along they
The
come.
big boys jumping out of trees.
And nothing
Wow.
like, say, Brent Hill or Craig or anyone operates like now, where they just run along and yell out. They would actually deal individually with each bookie. There was no running along.
No, there's no
yelling out.
1 to win 5, 1 to win 5, 1 to win 5.
No.
The bet had to be made.
Had to be written and ticket taken. Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, they might have sort of left the business to be concluded, but there was. It was only when Sean Bartholomew started betting that we started seeing people running along, just yelling out, screaming at bookies. But obviously, by that stage, bookies had become so desperate for business that they let that happen. But the old school bookies would never have tolerated anyone leaving them before the bet was transacted. So anyway, Dominic would go up, put up bodgy prices, and his team would move in and back them. And that was he was seen as the creme de la creme of punting bookies. He left the scene in 1987, and obviously there was sort of Marc Reed or people like that filled that gap. But and Peter was betting, I think, with Chris Hickey and Frank. Welders Frank?
Welders Frank, yep.
But then I came along and I didn't realise, but I'd got their noses out of joint. Like, they were shares in his business. I didn't know any of this. Yeah. I was just young and green, and I didn't realise I was being an upstart. So come the early 90s, Peter and I started betting together, and we had tons of bad bets. Tons of bad bets. We were betting to prices. So we weren't backing anything we had shorter than. Sorry, we weren't backing anything shorter than 9 to 4, because we were outlaying too much. Figured we were outlaying too much money on those horses, and it was too easy to be radically wrong at that area of the market. The market was way too short. So you were sort of relying on horses that you might have marked 7 to 1 and you're getting 9 to 1 about. They were your bread and butter. And there was a famous day, it might have been the year Sprint By won the Doncaster. Was it 1996?
That's right, Sprint By. That was really wet, wasn't it? It almost called off. Was it Sprint By or was it another game?
Ken Bell won the Oaks. It was that year. That was the year that we killed it, nailed it, backed heaps and heaps of winners. That's memorable because it didn't happen very often. So we were going along okay. Winning, losing. Using it to live. Both of us had young families, and exes were pretty high. Peter had won the Superfecta in the meantime, and he bought this mansion on Allison Road. It's up on the hill. So you go down the dip after you leave Carrington Road. So Allison Road, across Carrington Road, down the dip, you had this big place up on up on the left.
Was that when the Superfecta was only available on course?
Yeah. You weren't 50% in.
No, unfortunately. Unfortunately, but I was still, selling markets through this stage. So I was selling markets and I was betting off the same markets. So nothing happening. No ducks and drakes, just straight up and down. And as I say, we were having lots of bad bets. But I mean, bookies, they love punters having a crack, and to think they've got a chance with punters. So there was no animosity between the bookies and other than David Cohen, who was just a complete arsehole the whole time. If he didn't want to lay horse, he just turned his back to you. Warren Durham Jr. might have been a bit antsy at times. Henry Noonan hadn't started working at that stage, so that was all yet to come. No sign of Leo Lewin.
So you get to that stage, and when did Peter Todd pull the pin in betting in the ring?
Well, we both basically. He did run in and out of fortunes, and he was a lot like Glenn in many respects, in that he did his best work when he needed to.
Yep.
Whereas I was just running low, and then thankfully just kicking up off the canvas and putting the bank together again, and then running down to near zero and just happening to kick it again. Come 1998, we're both getting a bit Peter's just about gone.
Yeah.
And
he's had enough of the peaks and troughs, and the peaks and troughs never really suit you.
They didn't, but I had other things going on then.
Yeah.
Right. So my off-track life was hotting up. Things were happening off-track, and emotionally I was I'd been so stable emotionally all the way to this point, and suddenly it was like I was 18, but in fact I was early 30s. So I wasn't well placed to be an 18-year-old at that stage.
One might say that about a 39-year-old sitting here at the moment, but anyway.
But it's dangerous. It's dangerous for your business. If you've got a business,
Yeah.
it's very dangerous. So I suddenly became emotional, whereas previously I'd been very passionate about racing, but emotionless about everything in my life in order to run that business. So late 90s, I've hit the wall. And I've had to pull my head in. I've still got a couple of clients. Bookies were dropping off. So given that most of our clients have been bookies, I was experiencing the decline in my business that was paralleling the decline in bookmaking. I went and did a futures course because I'd known Steve McShane and a few others that had big success in the futures exchange. And I thought, well, this could be the way to go, given that I'd closed my bookmaking business. Peter had closed down, so we'd effectively stopped punting. And I was examining new options. At that time, I experienced another turning point. Glenn Munsey went off to work for TAB. And Glenn Munsey had been one of my competition. He'd been selling
Glenn was doing prices,
he'd been selling markets to bookies, principally, say, Charlie D'Amore, who was a client. Charlie D'Amore, Cole Tidy.
Cole Tidy, he was working with,
So he went off to work for TAB and stopped.
He started working for TAB, I think it was David Sim, who was running the TAB sports book, they were calling it at the time, when TAB first started it, brought Glenn across. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was David Sim who brought.
So Glenn was doing prices on 2KY at the same time. So he left that gig as well. So suddenly there was a gig available to do prices on 2KY. I'd already met Dallas by this stage because a couple of years prior, when I was still betting and fielding, a couple of years prior, Dallas had found me.
Yes.
And Matthew Browning was doing the morning show.
That's right. Yep.
And Hawkesbury, you needed someone to give some prices. Prices for Hawkesbury. Prices, best bet in a lay.
Something like that. Yeah, exactly.
So I was the resident bookie for Hawkesbury. I think Glenn had done the job.
Glenn was doing something. I think
Glenn Pollard.
I think Glenn Munsey actually replaced Glenn Pollard.
Is that right?
Yep. There's a weird little connection there before the punters show. Glenn doesn't remember doing it. I think it went Glenn Munsey, Marc.
And I had no idea that Dallas was so young, because Dallas was just like, yeah, mate, like you got to do this, you got to do that. Dallas seemed to know everything. Then I met him.
What's changed?
He turned up at the races a couple of times, and I met him and I'm going, wow, he's just so full of beans. Such an irrepressible Duracell bunny type that was just, hard not to like.
I would have been probably 19 at the time, I would have thought.
I had no idea you were so young.
Yeah, no, it's for sure.
He was just because you know how you'd meet young kids and you go, well, like for example, Aaron is obviously young.
Yeah.
Aaron's got a bit to like about him, and he's clearly got a few clues, but he's obviously young. Dallas wasn't like that. Dallas wasn't obviously young. Dallas was like across things in a way that
well-read individual.
I don't know. When we do the feature interview, you can find out. That's for you to work out.
Yeah. So the turning point, 1999. Suddenly, there's opportunities open. There's fresh bookies have come on board to buy my assets, and 2KY want me on
Saturday mornings, wasn't it?
On Saturday mornings, Mac Presnell and
Ian Craig, turf time.
Saturday mornings,
which was at the time too. This is the time I was working there, and I think probably well before that, at least for 10 years, was that Saturday morning show was not once beaten in a rating survey. It's almost like Alan Jones. It was, and rating.
So was Auntie Dick and Uncle Dick and Auntie Dora still on?
They had gone by the time you were there, but when I started, Uncle Dick, I used to ring Uncle Dick and Auntie Dora, that was one of the first things I did. I was still at school and doing work experience at 2KY, and ringing those people, so they were still on, so yeah.
So and in I think it was 2000, TAB actually bought 2KY,
and I was moved out the door.
Right, well, because that got me another break, because suddenly poor old Dennis Gieska was shown the door. Dennis Gieska was a bookie at the time. It was before he did the doubles. He was just a bookie in the Sydney Ring.
I used to work with his son at Unibet.
Yep. Yep, and Dennis was a good price assessor.
Yeah. Dennis, because he was a bookie, Tab said we don't want any bookies doing the show.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
suddenly
Exactly
I got
Yeah.
midweek gigs as well.
Yep.
So I was being rung midweek. I was being rung Saturday morning for only a 15-minute or maximum half an hour on a Saturday morning. But then there was a new broom somewhere, and poor old Max got shown the door.
Bucko, me. Yeah, there was it was an execution. There was just the next one I'd walk across to the pub. You're gone too. Yep. Here we are.
Who was responsible for all that?
It was when Sky Channel took over. Jeff Font was in the. Oh, they are. Yeah.
Ian Trent have anything to do with it?
Oh, I think they sought the opinions of the people at 2KY. Yeah, Ian Trent, John Walsh, Malcolm Wallace was there at the time. I think whoever the Trumps
anyway,
were. But it was Sky Channel made the offer.
So okay, it was clearly very bad for Bucko and Co. I'm sure it did you a favour in some way, Dels.
Probably did, yeah.
But it meant that suddenly I was trooping into 2KY on Saturday mornings for a chat with Ronnie and Terry Bailey.
That's right, of course, yes.
And then I don't know, something happened with poor old Terry, so Nadia Horn got moved in, and then finally it was Bensley. But through those 2000s, I got to do a show with Radley midweek. I was going in on Wednesdays to do an hour-long show with Radley, and we were talking about racing. And I think I was a bit different from people they'd had before, because I was like an academic.
Yeah.
You know, they'd sort of I mean, I suppose they'd only had experience with. Look, they had Dominic on the show in the late 80s.
Yep.
And that was sort of revolutionary. But in terms of their sort of education, their punter education, it was pretty light on the ground, pretty thin on the ground. So through the 2000s, I was in there being a little bit...
left of centre?
Yeah. And not caring too much about what I said.
Doesn't really marry too well with the TAV, does it?
No,
Well, the amazing thing was that at the end of 2005, I got on radio Friday morning. You know, did the prices for a Rose Hill meeting. You know, there's a Rose Hill meeting on Friday morning in December. It's the Christmas party meeting.
Yeah.
And I'd been really cheesed off about this Paul Perry horse that had run in a Canterbury night meeting 2 weeks before. Rolly Saxton had ridden it at the night meeting.
Rolly Saxton.
Lo and behold, G Boss was engaged to ride at the front of Friday Rose Hill meeting, and I was so pissed off by the fact that I'd liked it and clearly shouldn't have liked it because of the rider choice.
Yeah.
And then, you know, basically Paul was telling me to like it here because he found G Boss to ride it, and I just said, that Paul Perry had signalled his intentions with its choice of rider this time, and I'd used a word that I shouldn't have used. And Greg Rudolph was on the phone to me a couple of weeks later going, we'd like you to come in and have a chat to us about what you said on a radio program. And I was charged and found guilty with bringing racing into disrepute.
Greg doesn't watch the Punter show on Fridays. It's on Monday.
Different world now.
That's just good.
Yeah, so as a licensed person, because I was continuing to be a clerk at the time, I was clerk for Robbie, but I've been a clerk the whole time. They had power over me, and I was forced to retract, and I was fined $1,500. But it didn't stop me I had a summer season at Sky Racing Retro. So there was Sam Nadai, myself, and Michael Fraser had a summer season of 4 or 5 shows. Racing Retro in the summer, and that was really good. But apparently, people couldn't understand why they let someone so messy on the TV. It was my one and only TV gig.
I saw a photo of you on your website. You used to be the Byron Bay surfer in you. Is that what you were like naturally?
I was body surfer. There was no boards involved. But that was they were the 2000s. And finally, I said my own mind once too often. All Silent, who'd become a pin-up horse at that stage, was resuming in the Liverpool City Cup right at Randwick. So obviously Warwick Farm was persona non grata at that stage. And Pete Wells was engaged. And I said, once again, I get into trouble with rider choices.
Hello, Danny Beasley.
I'd said that Graham Begg was clearly not fancying his horse today.
Right.
So that was the end of me at 2KY.
Yeah.
Bensley was in the chair at that stage, so Andrew and I didn't get on very well. Basically because we never...
Oh, Andrew's very, well, controversy isn't Andrew's go.
No, but also, we weren't in the same studio. He was in Melbourne pretending to be in Sydney.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And there was
I
Ronnie
did
and
that.
I in the Sydney studio, and everyone had to pretend that Andrew was in Sydney. So I didn't actually meet, I met Andrew once.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so all our dealings were via the studio link. So, you know, Andrew wanted to run things his way, and I wasn't too happy about that. So Andrew didn't go into bat for me when I got in trouble. In fact, he may have gone the opposite. So that's it. I was lost.
Yeah.
I was lost to the media
Yep.
until D Baker comes
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm continuing to sell markets, and I started podcasting on my own website at that stage. I was basically putting together a little package of what I might have said on 2KY. Thanks to Andrew Kelly from Ozrace for suggesting that. But then D Baker came along with this idea of, hosting something from RaceNet called The Contest Show. He said, look, we'll do 3 10-minute segments.
That was the plan.
I've organised Glenn Pollitt, you know Glenn, from the races, to do this show where we'll talk about things racing, and we haven't looked back.
No, exactly. Well, it was the right mix. The key to it was getting the mix. We'd had sort of an idea of doing it. You thought, well, you need that in there. It's just people sitting around and be trying, that and that. And then that developed from there, and here we are. So obviously, people who watch all the stuff and that know that how much thought and torture you put into the form theories and that. When did that really start, and like that how?
When I was 10, Dale.
Yeah, so that's all been that development all the way through, and all the, I suppose, one of the great things with, hopefully it's up there when we're talking into the future, you can see all your pearls of wisdoms and all your thoughts, which I suppose in a lot of ways go against the grain to what the common thoughts have been. Has that sort of been the way that you've looked at it, try to deconstruct the theories that have been put out there and put acid on them and come up with it? How do you
so many truisms and motherhood statements and
Yep.
old wives' tales when it comes to racing out there.
Yep.
And I'm not going to say that mine aren't, because obviously when you make generalisations, you run into trouble.
That's right.
But there's been a lot to challenge. There is a lot to challenge.
Absolutely.
There's still all these myths out there
Yep.
that are promoted through the mainstream media all the time, and that's the way of the world. You know, you watch any type of media anytime, and there's all this blather coming out. And we're all guilty of blather because we've got screens to fill or time to fill or whatever, and we all talk shit a lot of the time anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And as you know from being in those media roles, the hosts of those shows have to talk shit for 6 hours.
Yeah.
It's essentially what has to happen.
Yeah, and
No doubt.
with not too many ums.
Yeah, and you just know when you're doing and you're getting the routine. Half the time you know that when I was at 2K, you're talking shit, but you got to talk.
Yeah, exactly.
But from the academic point of view, you're listening to this going,
Yeah, you just want to get down to business.
Yeah.
you're just trying to cut through because it's so hard to actually get any traction when obviously people are confronted with wall-to-wall nothingness.
Exactly right. As I said, check out the whole full list of the pearls of wisdom. Do you have a favourite pearl, or is it one that as you develop it? I mean, you've been bringing up new ones all the time. Like, your favourite one at the moment seems to be the golden switch.
Yeah, that's true.
Is it when you've got a new one that's the favourite until the next new one comes along?
They become fashionable.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, I have. Who did we have on the show at one stage that was it Gary Brown? Gary Brown, is that his name? Gary Johns? Gary
Johnson.
Gary Johnson.
Yeah.
Johnson, who actually challenged me on Sitting in the Death because up until that stage we were big fans of Sitting in the Death. We'd watch Nash sit in the death there time after time and just control the race from the death.
Yes.
And yes, you can control the race from the death, but he actually planted in my head the fact that the death wasn't necessarily a position of control.
Yeah.
Well, as outside leader.
Outside leader.
Leader bang there.
Yeah. Outside leader can be a fucking place to be, or not. It's more that you do more work there than you realise. So anyway, that was I like to think of myself as open-minded, even though I'm clearly full of shit most of the time.
Well, getting away from yourself, you've been there for a long time, obviously, and seeing it. You deal right at the coalface with some of the best punters we've ever seen. Best punters we see now. What some of the things that I suppose, is there a consistency to what makes a good punter that you've seen? You know, I mean, and your work closest to, I suppose, the one that everyone regards the best is Robbie Waterhouse.
Yeah, and you know, I perhaps glossed over the stage where he became another mentoring, or sort of partnering almost figure in my career.
Yeah.
In that I didn't know Robbie before August the 18th, no, before December '84, which is when he left, because August the 18th was when Fine Cotton happened, and I remember being at Warwick Farm on that day. But I didn't have any personal contact with him, and he wasn't that much older than me. He's 11 years older than me. Well, which obviously is a gulf at that time when you're 19 years
19
old.
to 30
Someone
is
who's 30 seems fairly old. But when he returned to the track in '99, and Peter and I were both just in the members. We might have been still playing exotics or having the odd bit or whatever, and there was lots of downtime. Robbie turned up and he was eager to find out what was going on. And he knew Peter from before because they were virtually peers. Peter's only 18 months older than him. And Peter introduced me to him, and straight away I went, wow, he's a guy that he has a sophisticated view of racing. And they're a bit thin on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's not that many people that understand nuances, like,
or even want to understand the
nuances. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Lots of people couldn't.
And then enjoy talking about the nuances.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, I don't think we could open up a big licensed club.
Special type of people.
The Racing Nuances Club. Come and join us.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the critical sections.
It's a bit tortured. Yeah. But he and I hit it off straight away.
Yeah.
Like, he obviously saw in me somebody that understood racing like he did, which isn't necessary. You don't need to understand racing like that, but we connected. So in 2001, when he finally gets his licence back, I'd always indicated that I'd like to come and work with him. And so I think I was working with Mo at the time, but on Thursdays, Robbie was just working everywhere at that stage because he was so pleased to be back.
Yeah.
Unlike now, where he's sort of, he's less enthusiastic. He's been ground down like the rest of us. But in 2001, he worked everywhere, and it even meant that we went to New Zealand to field, and we're the only bookie to have fielded in New Zealand, other than the New Zealand Fixed Odds tab, which is not really a bookie; it's something else. We're the only bookie to field in New Zealand in the last 100 years.
Wow!
And we set up on the grass at Tarapa, February the 2nd, 2002. It was their sort of like Magic Millions meeting.
Yeah.
And it was a great day. Distinctly Secret won a low-grade race, and he was the coup of the day because the guy that had set up the Robbie coming over, David Ellis, they knew each other quite well. David Ellis said, David Ellis said, come on, I'll get special permission for you to field. And in the meantime, he got his trainer to set a horse to win at the meeting. I'm going to clean up this bookie.
And did he get wrong? Or?
Well, the funny thing was that I'd done the form on this 10-race program. There were 200 horses running or something.
Yeah.
Well, New Zealand, for some reason, they can get a bloody meeting.
Yeah.
Jesus, that was a nightmare. So Robbie had done his own form, and he did a really good job because he's got access to stuff that I didn't. I was just doing my best. Didn't know these horses.
You were queuing up at Holt Street to get the spoils, but
I got the Friday Flash. That's
New Zealand sportsman.
Yeah.
And
I found I basically got one race right. There was this 3-year-old resuming in his autumn campaign and a 1400 metre race, and he'd done a few nice things in his spring campaign, and I found it. And I said, look, I really like this horse in this race. I've been wrong for 8 races. Come the 9th race, I found it, and Robbie didn't actually find it. But he probably worked out that this was David Ellis's horse.
Yeah.
The horse went up $11 on the table. There were no fixed odds at that stage. And we put up 5-2. David Ellis came in and said, how much can I over this horse? 10,000. we had most of it back on the toast.
Yeah.
Course one, he was happy, we were happy because we basically hadn't been.
Yeah.
hadn't been.
Square result. Everyone's happy.
Crisis avoided.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
what-
that was a great day.
What are the strengths of them? What is there a common denominator to the successful punters, the ones who have made the most, or are they all individuals?
There is a common thread, and they all have an edge of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the first best punters I remember was Gary Forrester, and his edge was patience. Yeah, the patience. I was saying he would just sit back and sit back and sit back, and he'd wait till there was a field of 8. Bookies were betting each way, and there was something not to like about the favourite, and he backed the 5-2 chance each way. And he just didn't miss. Did not miss.
Might go a meeting without having a bet. Might go 2 meetings without having a bet.
He just seemed to be as cool as a cucumber, and he just wait and wait and wait till things were so much in his favour. Whereas his partner at the time, Cookie, his edge might have been in what he knew, or it seemed to be in some sort of information that he had. So he would bet like the Watsons, betting here, betting there, betting everywhere.
Betting like the Watson.
We heard that one the other day, didn't we? It's a good one.
I don't know who the Watsons are. See, that's one of
But
those
they've
things you
been a lot-
say. You
yeah.
just grow up hearing, and you say it yourself.
Yeah.
You do never actually challenge where it's come from.
No.
Google that if you're watching.
Mr. and Mrs. Watson. So you say the ultimate
Edge.
it's the edge, and whether that's an edge by A, B, C, or D, whatever it is.
By computer programs now.
Well, see, Dr. Nick he's always looking to come up with an edge. Usually by he's sort of running the ratings to win schema, like running figures, crunching figures all the time, looking for little overlooked edges. And he was the first one that just started backing the balls out of backer-uppers. I mean, people were talking about, ever since Pablo's Pulse won the Warwick Stakes, it was a rich vein of conversation, quick backer-uppers. But it was Dr. Nick that actually started pounding them, like routinely backing them.
Is he quite possibly the longest survivor out of them? Yeah, of course he'd have to be, wouldn't he?
Yeah. I mean, because he's a very cool customer.
Yeah.
I mean, they seem to bet a lot now. They were much more selective once upon a time.
But isn't that the evolution of it all too?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you need to turn over money.
Yeah.
Right? You accept smaller margins.
Yeah, greater turnover, smaller
return-
margins. Yeah, and that's what we're seeing with all of the boys now, aren't they? Because they're betting everywhere they can, and just turnover, margin.
Yeah. So I had the opportunity to work for Gelco in the early.
Of course.
I didn't realise I was working for Gelco. So there was an ad.
You weren't working, you were just part of a punting club, Mark.
There was an ad in the Sportsman calling for analysts.
Okay.
And I thought I knew everything there was to know at the time. And I thought that the only people that knew anything about racing were the guys at the races. And I went to this seminar at the Sir Stamford near the Macquarie Centre at North Ryde.
Yeah, North Ryde,
What's it called now? Is it still that?
I think it's so. I used to have Christmas. I reckon over 3 or 4 Christmas lunches in a row there.
Anyway, there was this lady, middle-aged lady there, and Jackie somebody, and she seemed to know everything. And I went, but I've never seen you at the races before. There were a pile of people in there that had responded to the ad, plus a few of her helpers, and there was a breadth of knowledge there that I couldn't get over. I didn't know any of these people from the track. Not
all contained at the track. Yeah.
But they had an understanding of racing that I thought I was bowled over by. I was so impressed. I'd managed to pass the test, but the test wasn't easy. There was an exam. We had to sit an exam.
I heard there's still an exam.
Yeah.
What I understand.
So they would present these scenarios, and you would have to offer your opinion of these scenarios. Basically talking about situations that happen in races. Are they good or bad, and why are they good or bad? And most of them are challenging the mainstream view of things.
But that suits you because it's that challenge of the mainstream view, and I suppose would the defining point of Gelco's operation be thoroughness?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got a video watching job with Humbleton. I didn't realise it was Gelco at the time. And they would send you out a tape and a worksheet, and you'd have to sit there on telly and watch the tape and fill out this manually fill out this grid. It was a massive grid that you were required to undergo training to fill out. Firstly, so you had to be trained, and then you would be sent races to do on your own, and every 10th set would be checked by your senior, and they might call you in to sort of give you a few tips and pointers and whatever. Very, very intense. They're paying you $1.40 a horse, and you were reviewing. I was reviewing American racing, so I was getting sent these horses. I didn't know them. They were shit horses from Penn State or Gulfstream or wherever they were. It wasn't very exciting. It wasn't very exciting because you didn't know the horses, and it was quite laborious. There was.
It was reviewing as opposed
you were just,
to.
Yeah, you were reviewing, but you were just a cog in a system as well.
Exactly right, and
So you
not
never-
even really knowing where that system ends up either.
You never got to see what happened to these horses or what happened to the analysis. I mean, it was worthwhile work because it's not that easy to carve out a crust in racing, and that was one means. And it was quite informative. It got you, it challenged you, and improved your video watching no end.
30 years on, Mark, it's not the easiest thing. It is, you mentioned the word laborious. The game is a tenth of what it was. What's the drive? What keeps it going?
The fact that you feel like you're on the precipice of getting it right, and that's the feeling for lots of people. Lots of people. You don't need to get it right that often to make money out of the game. So you just need to get it right just often enough. I mean, we've just come through 3 days, and I would say that my set was pretty average on Saturday, probably slightly better at Kegler. Sunday was fair and pretty average yesterday, and I managed to win on all 3 days simply by picking the eyes out of it, reading between the lines. It's a game where you always think you should be doing better than you are, but you're probably doing well enough to make a living. And lots of you out there will be able to achieve the same result. There will be the superstars in the game, and good luck to them. But there is still room for the chiselers, and I'm a technician. I've been bashing away at this forever, and I will bash away at it forever, like absolutely giving it my best because I love thinking that I can get it right, and I'm getting it just enough right. There's always promise. There's always the sort of the allure of perfection, but there's enough to work with.
The reality that imperfection is probably the greater, a good amount of almost perfect is good. It is worthwhile. That's what it is. Beautiful. Well, that's the story, Mark. Is there anything else that we've?
Oh, I'm sure there's lots of
other things, but you can actually watch the Punter Show and do it. But it's very fascinating to go back and hear the stories of the old times, Matt.
No, exactly, and it sounds like it's changed quite a lot, obviously.
Yeah, and you just move with the changes, and you sort of forget until you start. Like people, that's the reason people gather together at the pub to reminisce about what happened when, and what things were like, and how things were done, and whatever. But you sort of just roll with the punches and get with the program. I mean, I know that a lot of people, particularly in racing, are quite retrograde or hidebound. They hang on to the past because the past was so good because everyone had to bet you to win 5,000 and this and that. But
and when we talk the past isn't that far away.
The
past is when I was there too. So I mean, it's we're not talking.
It doesn't seem that long ago, although so much has changed. In fact, the landscape is changing in front of our eyes.
It has changed very quickly. Anyway, well, Marc Lambourne, thank you very much for, I don't even know if we're calling this anything, but a feature interview with Marc. It's been great actually sitting down and talking to you. It's brought back great memories for me, that's for sure. And hopefully for many people out there, and for those who didn't know Marc, there he is.
Thanks, Alice. Thanks,
you.
everybody.